Hello and welcome back. I'm always excited to come before you all with what the Lord is saying right now. As you all know, I was in my prayer time with the Lord this morning, and He was really leading me to share with you all a really quick word about fear and faith. And what it really is that when it comes to fear and faith, they cannot exist within one person or in the same environment at the same time. They just can't. One is going to overpower the other. And so what that means is that you can't have fear and faith within you at the same time when it comes to any situation. When it's something that maybe you want to say, or when it's something that you want to do, maybe you want a promotion at your job, or maybe you want to do something, but one of those two things are going to come to the forefront, and you get to decide which one it is. You get to decide, are you going to be fearful in this moment, or are you going to use faith in this moment? And it goes back to, I like using the example of David and Goliath, right? Because we can clearly see an example of fear and faith at play, where the army and Saul, they did not want to go up against Goliath and the Philistines, right? But then you have, there is the spirit of fear at play there. But then you have David, who is using faith, which is the complete opposite, and he's a lot smaller, and he's one person, and he's able to go up against Goliath. And the Lord was actually leading me to share with you two scriptures. And the first one is Mark chapter 11, verse 23, where Jesus is saying, "For verily I say unto you, that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he says has come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he says." And so what God is saying is, if you have faith, you can say to the mountain, pretty much be cast into the sea. And so we see this happening with David and Goliath. We clearly see what happens when you decide in your mind and your heart that you're going to choose faith. And I'm going to explain to you a really profound revelation about David and Goliath that not many people share, after I read to you Matthew chapter 17, verse 20, where the word of God is saying again, "And Jesus said to them, Because of your unbelief, for verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of a mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, remove over there, be cast into the sea, and it shall be removed, and nothing should be impossible for you." So, and with the story of David and Goliath, we literally see him do what was considered the impossible, right? And when I talk about Goliath, I consider him as a mountain. When God is talking about having faith where you can cast mountains into the sea, obviously he's not talking about physical mountains, but he's talking about personal mountains in your own life. Yes, physical mountains can be moved with earthquakes and things of that, and cracks in the earth and things like that, but he's talking about personal mountains in your own life. You can speak to those mountains. Using a very generic example of debt, you can speak to the mountain of debt and say, "Be cast into the sea." And what that means is that it ceased to exist anymore. It doesn't mean that you go up the mountain, because then you're standing on top of it, right? And it still exists. And it doesn't mean that you go around the mountain, because then you're just circling the same problem over and over again. But it means that you speak to it and you cast it into the sea. It ceased to exist anymore. And so we see a perfect example of what this looks like, casting your mountain into the sea, where it ceased to exist anymore, with David and Goliath, because here he is facing a mountain in his life, which is Goliath, and he ceased to exist because David was able to defeat him with faith, not fear. And so we understand that he ceased to exist because it says, I'm going to read to you in 1 Samuel chapter 17:51, where it says, "David went over to Goliath and he chopped off his head." He took the head off. So what that means is that you get down to the root of it and you pull it up at the root, and it ceased to exist anymore. So what people don't really share about having faith that moves mountains, and how David was able to actually defeat Goliath, which was his own personal mountain battle in his life, is that in order to have faith to do that, you have to have the wisdom of God, right? In order to have the wisdom of God, well, when you have the wisdom of God first, that brings understanding, and it puts you at a level in God where you're able to have faith that moves mountains. And so it's this large mountain that you're staring at in this personal battle in your life, and you're wondering, how can I move this mountain? It's not by staring at it, looking at it face on, at face value through your natural eye, because it's going to look huge, right? That's what Saul was doing when he was looking at Goliath. That's what Saul and the Israelites were doing when they were looking at the Philistines, right? But it's by coming up to God's perspective. There's that theme that I keep talking about, coming up to God's perspective. And when you come up to God's perspective, like David did, then you have the wisdom of God. And when you're looking at the world and your problems and the mountains from God's perspective, they're no longer mountains anymore. You're looking down in the mountain, and suddenly you're bigger than that mountain. Suddenly you're bigger than that problem. Suddenly you're bigger than that issue at work, or that mountain of debt in your life, or this issue in your family, or whatever it is. You're bigger than that mountain in your life. And when you're bigger than it, when you're looking down at it from God's perspective, you're able to defeat it. You're able to speak to it, pick it up, and cast it into the sea to where it no longer exists anymore. So what people don't really understand about the David and Goliath story is that David was at a place in his mind, he had the wisdom of God, and he had the perspective of God, to where he suddenly became bigger than Goliath. So when he was facing Goliath, when he came face to face with Goliath, he didn't see him as this giant like Saul and the other Israelites did. He seen him as someone who he was bigger than, because he had already went up against bears. He had already protected a flock. He had already been training for this, right? So he's seen him as someone he was bigger than in his mind, because he had the perspective of God. So when you're looking at your mountains, you have to look at them with the perspective of God, and not through the natural eye, because with the perspective of God, your mountains suddenly shrink and you're bigger than them. So that's how you use faith to cast the mountains into the sea. But it's a personal decision that you have to make every single day. Are you going to choose faith, or are you going to choose fear? And you'll find that you're making this decision constantly, all the time. If you have something to say and someone's silencing your voice, or if you have something to do, but maybe you feel like you shouldn't do it for a certain reason, or you want to ask for promotion at work, or you want to stand up for yourself, right? Like someone's disrespecting you and you need to stand up for yourself. You have to decide in each of these moments, in a lot of moments in your life, are you going to choose fear, or are you going to choose faith? I just want to leave you all with that today. I hope this blesses you. Let me know in the comments if this was something that blessed you.